Dragon Ball has returned to the days of Frieza, Cell, and now back to the magic of the Buu Saga. The Buu Saga is when Shin was first introduced to Dragon Ball, so it's very, very appropriate that Shin has a major role in Dragon Ball magic. So today I'm just going to look over Shin's character and sort of dissect why he is likely the main character and not Goku of Dragon Ball magic. Now, Goku, of course, as the main character of Dragon Ball as a whole, is likely going to have a huge role in Dragon Ball magic. But it's very clear to me what's going on here. Akira Toriyama is reading his old work and getting inspired from it. That's the reason that he did ROF. That's the reason that Cell made his return in Dragon Ball Super Hero. And that's why he sort of tied up the relationship between Gohan and Piccolo, dating all the way back in Z. And he's sort of doing that with Shin and Goku now. A lot of people don't remember this, but when Shin and Goku first met each other, it was actually very surreal. Shin had actually known about Goku the entire time and was very fascinated to meet him and wanted to spar with him, and actually compliments him and tells him that he has heard that he has an amazing spirit. So from the very introduction of Shin's character, he has had a great respect for Goku, quite the opposite to Zamasu, which is pretty ironic because when Shin was first introduced, everybody thought that he was going to be a Zamasu-like character. But what if I was to tell you that Shin and Zamasu actually have more in common than you actually think? So before we do anything else, let's look at the job of the Kaioshin. Let's look at what their actual job is. So whenever Gowasu introduces Zamasu to the Barbary, he is absolutely disgusted by them. And Gowasu essentially tells him that despite his hatred for mortals, there's no such thing as worthless beings in the universe. He tells him even earthworms can contribute to the soil and become life energy for other animals, and everything happens for a reason. So Zamasu says that once the mortals acquire knowledge, they always destroy the environment. And Gowasu tells him that their purpose is, of course, to maintain peace if there is a planet that becomes devoid of peace and disturbs the balance of the universe, but they are supposed to think of a way that the mortals can fix it themselves. And then Gowasu warns Zamasu not to let his sense of justice get the best of him, and that his training as a martial artist is meant to serve the purpose of balancing his heart, which is a cool reference to the balance that Goku achieved as a Super Saiyan through the use of martial arts and learning it as an Earthling. So essentially, the goal of mortal development is enlightenment, as stated in the Dragon Ball Super anime, but what enlightenment actually is what Gowasu is speaking of here in terms of Zamasu's goal. So Gowasu was sort of putting Zamasu through mortal development through teaching him martial arts, and martial arts is the centerpiece of mortal development throughout the universe for the Kai. So essentially, the fact that the gods of destruction, the Kaioshin, the angels, the fact that they're all martial artists is not a coincidence, because the entire god hierarchy is centered around the use of martial arts. Now, this balance also applies to the overall life forms of the universe, meaning that despite the fact that the Kai's goal is to balance the mortals through the use of martial arts, there still has to be evil beings in order for there to be obstacles for these beings to learn to balance their heart through the use of martial arts. It's just like Gowasu said. Every being in the universe serves a purpose and is necessary for the purposes of mortal development. And so the Kai's job is to maintain balance of the hearts of mortals while also maintaining the balance of the universe itself. And the balance of the universe is something that's been talked about even in Dragon Ball Super a lot recently with Frieza. And it's a very, very important aspect of Dragon Ball's overall story. Now, after rereading the Buu Saga, I noticed quite a few things about Shin that are very, very interesting. And they are things that Dragon Ball Super actually calls attention to later on in the series during the Goku Black / Zamasu arc, which is pretty interesting considering that Dragon Ball Magic is centered around a Saiyan Kai duo, very similar to Goku Black and Zamasu. Very, very interesting stuff. But when Shin is first introduced, he is supremely confident, and he's also, again, very excited to meet Goku. And as things progress, as things get more desperate, you can sort of see Shin's true nature come out. And that's something that the series itself plays on because it's an actual psychological fact. As you're being pushed against the wall, that's when your true nature as an individual comes out. So Shin seems very stoic. He seems very impressive. He's literally considered the ruler of the entire universe during the Buu Saga. So they were hyping him up a lot. And I think that's something that people forget about Shin. And a lot of people think Shin is a disappointment for these same reasons, but that's something that people tend to forget about him, is that he was very, very, very hyped as a character when he was first introduced. And you could tell that Toriyama was digging the concept of the Supreme Kai. He really went out of his way to make him cool looking and appealing in comparison to the other Kai before, and he really fleshed out his character a lot in terms of like his history, his backstory, and things of that nature. So with the idea of Dragon Ball Magic being centered around demons and magic, this arc is the perfect arc to look back at to sort of like get an idea of why they decided to play on magic again. This is following the resurrection of Frieza, the rebirth of Cell. And so it's appropriate for Toriyama to move on to the glory days of the Buu Saga when everything was centered around magic and demons. A few things that I found very, very interesting while rereading the Buu arc within the context of Dragon Ball Magic, just sort of speculating on things. One thing I noticed that was very interesting is that Shin notes that Buu's egg was in a very dangerous place not accessible to mortals prior to the events of the Buu Saga. Now, when you consider where Babidi came from and who he is manipulating, the king of the demon universe, as it's called in the Dragon Ball manga, which the demon universe is a pretty interesting concept. King of the demon universe, as it's called in the manga. It's actually pretty interesting that Dabura was the most powerful from the demon universe and that Goku was the most powerful from the mortal universe. It sort of suggests that there's like two separate versions of mortal development going on there. Like there's a realm, the demon universe, where they sort of develop them the opposite way on purpose in order to, again, bring balance, which is a pretty interesting concept. But this suggests that Buu's egg was actually in the demon realm, which is pretty interesting to think about. So it's suggested that Babidi went to the demon realm, which has strong connections to magic. Toriyama has said himself that the demon realm is just a lair for sorcerers who are like little goblins. It makes perfect sense that that would be a place that Babidi would visit. He's a magical-based character who uses the evil in people's hearts to manipulate them. That was not only the perfect place to go to likely get Buu, but also to recruit strong warriors for him to manipulate and use, like Dabura. So that's very interesting to consider. But something else that I noticed is that Dabura being possessed may actually have more narrative purpose than people originally gave it credit for. Because in the Goku Black Saga, Dabura actually mentions that he sort of has a grudge against the Kai. And so it may be very likely that Babidi fueled Dabura's need to essentially expand the empire of the demon realm and sort of unbalance the universe by taking down the Kaioshin. So essentially Babidi was going to throw the entire universe off balance, which is the reason that Shin was justified in his actions in terms of his involvement. But there's something that I noticed about Shin when I was rereading the Buu arc, and that is that Shin is actually much more like Zamasu than you think. His strong sense of justice is centered around his job as a Kaioshin protecting mortals. You can actually tell that Shin has a very strong sense of justice, understandably so after Buu murdered everyone that he's ever known against evil beings, demons, and people who pose a threat to mortals. He has a very, very strong sense of justice and a very, very strong duty to his job. And so he's sort of an anti-Zamasu in that way. He is flawed as a Kaioshin himself, where he has a pure heart, as all Kaioshin do, but his pure heart is slanted and biased towards mortals, which is very, very interesting to think about. Shin's goal is likely to develop mortals and do what he needs to maintain the peace of the universe at all costs. Which means it's very, very similar to Zamasu, but it's like the exact opposite. So essentially, Shin's goal is so powerful in his mind that he's willing to do almost anything, and that includes upset the balance of the universe itself. I talked about that in my last video, and that is likely what Dragon Ball Magic is centered around. It is likely centered around the fact that Shin wants to essentially enlighten all mortals, even at the expense of the demon realm. And honestly, you can't even really blame him, because after having to deal with Babidi and Dabura, who was possessed by Babidi, of course, which is likely why they never clashed before that, Babidi's possession likely pushed Dabura to push his evil to new heights and try to take down the Kaioshin. You can't really blame Shin for having the attitude that he does, but I do think that that attitude ultimately will backfire in the sense that it will anger the demon realm and put the balance of the universe at risk. So I think the question of Dragon Ball Magic will likely be centered around mortal development and whether or not it is possible to actually develop all mortals in the way that Shin and Goku prefer to do, rather than in the way that the demon realm and other characters like to do. And it's very, very important to note that even Shin notes that what he was doing was not necessarily right or justified in the sense of the job of the Kai, and that normally, despite the fact that he was justified in his actions overall, normally as a Kaioshin, it's normally the job of a god of destruction to wipe out beings like Buu whenever they put the balance of the universe at risk. And it's really interesting because it sort of does, in the Goku Black arc, point out the commonality between Shin and Zamasu, because Zamasu has tons and tons of respect for Shin and Kibito because they specifically took out Buu. So that just goes to show you, like, the way that Shin went about doing things in that arc is something that Zamasu himself respects, which reflects the idea that Shin is a bit more like Zamasu than people would like to think. It's just slanted towards mortals rather than the death of mortals, the destruction of mortals. And so This is more than likely what Toriyama is going to choose to play on for Shin's character, and more than likely why Shin is either going to be the main character or will likely have the biggest role next to Goku in Dragon Ball Magic. It all makes sense, and it just feels like, this is the appropriate time to return to those types of themes. Anyway, I'm hyped for Dragon Ball Magic. I'm going to make as many videos discussing the possibilities for it as I can, building up to its official announcement. I'm just speculating right now, and I just figured maybe you guys would enjoy my speculation on the topic because I have been sort of studying it and looking into what the possibilities are. And I just think it's very interesting to think about and to talk about. So if you have any theories and you have any ideas of what Dragon Ball Magic may be about, and if you've done any studying and looking into it on your own, feel free to comment below and let me know your thoughts. I would love to read them. But anyway, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.